In 1967, Franklin was a sleepy agrarian town of about 7,000 people. The truth is, not much had changed since the Civil War. Economic conditions had been such that there just wasn't an opportunity for much development. But in 1967, a beloved antebellum home at the corner of Bridge Street and Fifth Avenue was demolished to put in a filling station, and citizens were outraged. A group of 19 men and women united to form the Heritage Foundation of Franklin and Williamson County. Their purpose was to conserve the best of the past and to plan for the benefit of the future. They were reacting not only to the destruction of a specific building, but to the impact of a flurry of development occurring for the first time in decades, thanks to the opening of Interstate 65. But in a fairly dilapidated and sometimes crime-ridden downtown, merchants were suffering, and now they had to compete with new shopping centers such as 100 Oaks, easily accessible by I-65. But then a Nashville developer announced the construction of a new 30,000 square foot shopping center on the southeast corner of the public square, demolishing D.T. Crockett's General Store, Wagner's Grocery, and Tom Cotton's auction barn. Unsuccessful during most of its tenure, the shopping center closed in the early 1980s and ultimately became our city hall. And by July 1972, the Historic Foundation submitted a nomination for the 16-block downtown Franklin area for recognition as a National Register District. At the time, the director of the Tennessee Historical Commission said that Franklin had the greatest concentration of buildings possessing historic and architectural value in Tennessee. Yet that same month, Harpeth National Bank demolished landmark Arlington Hotel building to put up a nondescript 1970s era brick box in its place. Today, the 231 Public Square building has brought much more contextual, historically sensitive architecture to that southeast quadrant, adjacent to where the new City Hall is set to be built. The bank allowed Dr. McPhail's office to be saved and a house to be moved from the site where the parking lot sits now. The Heritage Foundation opened the newly restored Dr. McPhail's office on East Main Street to the public as a visitor information center. Franklin received its first historic landmark in February 1974. The circa 1826 Hiram Masonic Hall on 2nd Avenue is our oldest public building still standing. It was the year the Heritage Foundation contracted with a major interstate tour line to bring busloads of visitors to the area for tours. It was the year the Tennessee Historic Commission nominated Winstead Hill to the National Register of Historic Places, and the newly constructed Carter's Court, a collection of shops and restaurants on Columbia Avenue developed by Calvin and Marilyn Layhew, had begun to gain national recognition as a tourist destination. But perhaps the most significant event that happened in 1974 was that was the year Rudy and Peter Jordan moved to town.
I guess my story in Franklin began in 1973 when we moved this old house that was going to be torn down from the parking lot at First Tennessee Bank. The house dates back, according to the county historian Rick Warwick, to 1835. He said that was as far as he could go with it. And so it's sort of a ramshackle New England style Cape Cod, which fit perfectly with my husband Peter, since he's a total New Englander, born in Maine, grew up in New Hampshire. When Peter and I moved here, he and I first did the newsletter for the Heritage Foundation of Franklin and Williamson County. We did a seminar, which Sue Berry, she got a grant from the National Endowment of the Humanities, and she said, Rudy Berry, she called me affectionately, you're going to be the director of this and Peter will be the humanist. So we invited everybody in town to identify the most important parts of Franklin. It became very controversial because as we identified the big players, a lot of the developers didn't appreciate being called out. Anyway, after Peter and I did the newsletter and I went on the board, then I became the director. That was a very exciting time in Franklin because we identified 28 buildings downtown where people agreed to work with me to get a historic tax credit. Then we took busloads of people to Charleston and Savannah, to Madison, Indiana, so we could learn lessons about how preservation was demonstrated. One of the most important things we learned was don't try to replicate another town, be yourself. Charleston and Savannah were 18th century towns. We were 19th century. And we have wonderful, wonderful examples of 19th century architecture that was intact downtown. Then we looked and decided what is the most important focus for us, and it was Main Street. The buildings had been slip covered in aluminum siding, and they had put up wrought iron canopies all up and down the street to make it look like a mall. So once we convinced the property owners that they could get the tax credits, and we could take down those slip covers that covered, in some cases, the entire fronts of the buildings. They had just transformed these buildings, and they were dark and gloomy and sort of second-rate shops. And we were very lucky in that a group of building owners decided to buy a number of those buildings and renovate them. We took down the canopies. There were almost stadium-looking lights on the square. In any event, we started the renovation of Main Street. Main Street is a four-point approach of organization, design, economic restructuring, and promotion. And we were very big on publicity and promotion, so we started 4 festivals over a number of years to call attention to our downtown. The first one was the Main Street Festival, which is every spring. The second festival was Pumpkin Fest, obviously for the children, to dress up and have fun. And it's done everything from 70 degrees to, we've had a snow right in the middle of Pumpkin Fest before. Dickens of a Christmas is like the second week in December. And we've done something called living windows so that people could demonstrate old crafts. We could have people dress up like Father Christmas and Tiny Tim and have musicians. It's great fun. So after trying to renovate Main Street, bring people in, we saw how very shoddy our downtown looked. In addition, we had pool halls, and there was another liquor store that had a, how do I put this, a house of pleasure upstairs. When we were about to lose our post office, we said, well, this can't happen. We can't stop them from moving out, but we're going to work with somebody who's willing to put in a contract postal unit. So we did a lot of publicity, and I had to meet with the historic preservation officer and the district person with the post office to make sure that we could keep our old post office boxes downtown. And the argument was, by using something arcane called 106 Review, we were able to argue that they couldn't use federal funds to move the post office from one site to another if it is going to interfere with anchoring the downtown. And luckily, our post office was right at the end, at a juncture point of Main Street. So it's a wonderful reuse of an old site. And it is the best post office in town. And that's what everybody loves about Franklin. The town is so friendly. Everybody is so nice. I will say it wasn't always that way because change comes, it's difficult sometimes.